Does the name Ted Bundy sound familiar to you? How deeply can we understand the dark side of human nature? Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Ted Bundy, one of history's most notorious serial killers. But this is not just a story about a killer, it's a terrifying journey into the dark corners of human nature. Imagine the person in front of you is extremely polite, educated, handsome, and charismatic. If this person approached you kindly to offer help, wouldn't you trust them? This was Ted Bundy's greatest weapon, creating trust. But what was behind that trust? Let's dive into Ted Bundy's life and try to understand how this monster was shaped. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Vermont. His birth was different from that of an ordinary child because Bundy was born out of wedlock, which caused significant stigma at the time. His mother, Louise Cowell, did not provide any information about his father when Ted was born. Although a salesman was listed as his father on the birth certificate, many records show his father as unknown. Some family members even suspected that Ted's biological father might have been his grandfather, Samuel Cowell. Imagine a child whose life is wrapped in mysteries from the moment of birth. What kind of turmoil could this have created in Bundy's mind? Bundy spent his childhood in the house of his grandfather, Samuel, and grandmother, Eleanor Cowell. Samuel Cowell, who seemed like an ordinary grandfather from the outside, was actually a nightmare inside the home. Violence and bullying were part of Samuel's life. He was cruel to his own family, animals, and even neighbors. Bundy grew up in this violent environment and experienced violence firsthand. What could such an environment do to a young child's mind? Samuel would beat family members, swing neighborhood cats by their tails, and occasionally go into violent rages when Ted's paternity issues were brought up. As Bundy grew up in this chaotic environment, the seeds of darkness within him slowly began to sprout. Ted began to exhibit disturbing behavior at an early age. For example, his Aunt Julia once woke up to find herself lying in a bed surrounded by knives, with Ted smiling at her. Was this just a child's game, or the first outward manifestation of his dark feelings? Such incidents showed that Ted Bundy's demonic impulses were slowly beginning to take shape. In 1950, Bundy and his mother moved out of his grandfather Samuel's house and settled in Tacoma, Washington. There, his mother married a hospital cook named Johnny Culpepper Bundy. After this marriage, Ted took his stepfather's surname and began using the name Ted Bundy. However, his relationship with his stepfather Johnny Bundy was never warm. Ted looked down on his stepfather and couldn't connect with him. Johnny tried to involve Ted in family activities, but Ted always kept his distance because he despised Johnny Bundy's intellect and was disappointed in many aspects of him. This situation only fueled Ted's inner anger and alienation. Ted Bundy's high school years were also quite unusual. Struggling with social relationships, Ted generally preferred to stay alone. He said he didn't have a natural ability to make friends, and he often stated, "I didn't understand why people wanted to be friends." This showed a significant disconnection in his relationships with others. He tried to fill his loneliness with theft and auto theft. While in high school, he was arrested several times for these crimes, but his records were later expunged. His interest in downhill skiing was his only notable athletic hobby. However, he even pursued this hobby with stolen equipment and fake tickets. One of the biggest turning points in Ted Bundy's life occurred during his university years. He began studying Chinese at the University of Washington but eventually turned to psychology, where he achieved great success. However, his relationship with Stephanie Brooks, whom he met at university and deeply loved, left deep scars in Ted Bundy's life. Stephanie ended their relationship due to Ted's immaturity and lack of passion, and this breakup became a major turning point in Ted's life. Stephanie's departure only fueled Ted Bundy's inner rage and drove him to seek revenge. Ted Bundy was deeply disappointed by Stephanie's rejection, which led to a deepening of his dark world. Feeling worthless, Ted turned to crime to suppress this anger. However, these crimes would eventually evolve into something far more terrifying. In 1974, Ted Bundy emerged during a period when young women began disappearing in Seattle. One of his first victims was Karen Sparks, a student at the University of Washington. Ted entered Sparks' basement apartment while she was sleeping, brutally beat her with a crowbar, and then assaulted her. Karen remained in a coma for 10 days and survived but suffered severe brain damage. Ted Bundy's brutal attacks didn't end with this incident. In fact, it marked the beginning of his murder spree. In February of the same year, another young woman named Linda Ann Healy disappeared. Ted entered Healy's house, kidnapped her, and left no trace. Healy's body was later found on Taylor Mountain. This was just one of the places where Bundy killed his victims and hid their bodies. Ted Bundy was becoming increasingly dangerous during this period. In March 1974, Donna Gail Manson, a student at Evergreen State College in Olympia, disappeared. In April, Susan Elaine Rancourt disappeared. The night Rancourt went missing, several witnesses reported that a man had asked them for help carrying his books. Ted Bundy often wore a cast, faked injuries, or pretended to be in need during this period to deceive and lure women. Once he gained their trust, he would abduct them. Ted Bundy usually took his victims to remote locations where he would torture them. After assaulting them, he would kill them either by beating them with a stick or strangling them. But his depravity didn't end there. He would return to the places where he had killed some of his victims and engage in acts with their decomposing bodies. He decapitated at least 12 victims and kept their heads as mementos. Ted Bundy's murder spree continued throughout 1974, claiming more and more victims each month. Brenda Carroll Ball, Georgianne Hawkins, Janice and Ott, Denise Marie Naslund. Many young women who couldn't escape Ted Bundy's grasp fell victim to his brutality. His crimes, particularly in Washington and Oregon, instilled great fear. The police worked tirelessly to find the missing women, but Bundy managed to evade capture each time. Ted Bundy's crimes continued when he moved to Utah in 1975. This time, young women began disappearing in Utah and Colorado. Bundy didn't stop after moving to Utah and abducted, tortured, and killed many young women there. One of his first victims was 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox. Nancy disappeared on October 2, 1974, in the town of Holiday, Utah. Ted Bundy confessed to kidnapping Nancy and burying her near Capitol Reef National Park. However, Nancy's body was never found. After Nancy Wilcox, on October 18, Melissa Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of the police chief in the town of Midvale, disappeared. Melissa vanished after leaving a pizza parlor, and her body was found 9 days later in a mountainous area. Bundy had tortured Melissa before killing her and kept her alive for a long time before ending her life. Ted Bundy's next victim was 17-year-old Laura Annam, who disappeared on October 31 in the town of Lehigh. Laura vanished after leaving a cafe, and her body was found on Thanksgiving in American Fork Canyon. Like his other victims, Laura M. was beaten, strangled, and assaulted. Bundy later confessed to the police that he returned to Laura May's body and applied makeup to her. In November, Ted Bundy attempted to abduct a young woman named Carol Duranch. In the town of Murray, at Fashion Place Shopping Center, Bundy posed as a police officer and told Carol that someone had tried to break into her car, convincing her to get into his car. However, Carol realized something was wrong and managed to escape from Bundy as he tried to handcuff her. Bundy's failed attempt brought him to the attention of the police, but there was still not enough evidence to arrest him. Just a few hours later, 17-year-old Deborah Jean Kent disappeared in the town of Bountiful. Deborah vanished after leaving a school theater to pick up her brother. Bundy abducted and killed Deborah as he had done with his other victims. The handcuff key found by the police matched the handcuffs Bundy had used on Carol Duranch. Ted Bundy continued his crimes throughout 1975 in Colorado and Idaho. In January, 23-year-old Karen Eileen Campbell disappeared while staying at a hotel in Snowmass, Colorado. Karen disappeared after leaving the hotel, and her body was found 36 days later on a dirt road near the hotel. During this period, Bundy targeted many women and brutally killed them. One of these women was 26-year-old Julie Cunningham. Julie disappeared in Vail, Colorado, and Bundy lured her into his car. He then killed Julie and buried her body west of Rifle. However, Julie's body was never found. Ted Bundy's crimes were not limited to just the western United States. In Grand Junction, Colorado, on April 6, 1975, a woman named Denise Lynn Oliverson disappeared while riding her bicycle. Bundy confessed to abducting Denise and throwing her body into the Colorado River, but her body was never found either. That same year, in Pocatello, Idaho, Bundy abducted 12-year-old Lynette Dawn Culver. He took Lynette to a hotel room, strangled her, and then disposed of her body in the Snake River. These crimes demonstrated the extent of Bundy's depravity and his ability to exert brutal control over innocent victims. As the police tried to put an end to Ted Bundy's reign of terror during this period, they began to track his movements. However, Bundy always managed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. His methodical approach to committing crimes made it incredibly difficult for the police to apprehend him. Bundy typically took his victims to remote, secluded areas where finding the bodies was nearly impossible, further delaying his capture. Nonetheless, Bundy's crimes continued unabated. By the end of 1975, Bundy's downfall was drawing near. The police finally managed to arrest him in Utah. He was caught in a stolen car, marking the beginning of the end for Bundy's crime spree. However, Bundy wasn't the type to give up easily. Even after his arrest, he managed to escape twice. The first escape occurred when he jumped from the second-floor window of the Pitkin County Courthouse Library. He evaded capture for several days in the mountains before being recaptured. His second escape was even more dramatic. Bundy managed to cut a hole in the ceiling of his cell and entered the jailer's apartment to make his escape. He was eventually captured while driving, but this time, his chances of escaping justice were slim. Ted Bundy's final chapter unfolded in Florida. In 1978, he made his way to Florida State University, where he attacked 4 young women at the Chi Omega sorority house. 2 women, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, were killed in the attack, while the other 2 survived with serious injuries. After these brutal attacks, Bundy was arrested and put on trial in Florida. In 1979, he was sentenced to death for the Chi Omega murders and assaults. However, this was not the end of Bundy's criminal saga. In 1980, he received a second death sentence for the kidnapping and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. Ted Bundy's life is not just the story of a serial killer but also a cautionary tale about the dark side of human nature. His story reveals how a man who gained society's trust could transform into a monster. Bundy used not only his physical strength but also his intelligence and charm to inflict harm on his victims and society. However, in the end, justice prevailed, and Bundy paid for his horrific crimes with his life. In conclusion, Ted Bundy's story is not only about the crimes he committed but also carries important lessons about how people should interact with one another. We must remember the importance of values such as trust, caution, and empathy. Individuals like Bundy can exploit these values, preying on people during their most vulnerable moments to serve their dark purposes. Thank you for watching this video. We took a closer look at Ted Bundy's story, and I hope this video has given you some insight into the dark side of human nature. If you'd like to see more content like this, please remember to like the video and subscribe to my channel. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about this? See you in the next video.